So if the family's desired outcome is listening and spoken language, then it's important to begin with an explanation of what actually is hearing. Hearing is brain access of auditory information. We hear with the brain. To elaborate a bit, humans are born with amazing sensory structures: eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin. And the purpose of these sensory receivers is to capture different types of environmental data, environmental information, and change that information into chemoelectric and neuroelectric impulses that can be received and read by the brain. So, for example, smelling, olfactory molecules enter through the nose, but the knowing of smelling occurs in the brain. So, for example, ooh, that's a chocolate chip cookie, or oh, that's a diaper that needs changing. The knowing of the meaning of that olfactory data is learned through exposure and experience. And the eyes are the doorway to the brain for visual wavelengths, for optic wavelengths. But the knowing of seeing occurs in the brain, not in the eye. Well, you know where I'm going with this. The ears are the doorway to the brain for auditory information, but the knowing of hearing occurs in the brain. Knowing the meaning of that auditory information comes from auditory experience, exposure, and practice, beginning actually 20 weeks before birth. I mean, think about it. The inner ear is mostly developed by about the 20th week of gestation, which means that typically developing babies are born with 20 weeks of auditory experience. Obviously not interactive experience, but their brains have been stimulated with auditory information. There's a great deal of the mother's voice being transmitted through her body, through the brain, to the brain of her baby. That's how critical auditory exposure is. So hearing is defined as brain perception of auditory information. Hearing occurs in the brain. We can therefore have a narrative with the family that explains hearing loss as a doorway problem. So hearing loss means something in the doorway, whether it's fluid or sensory neural hearing loss, whether that doorway is closed just a little bit, whether just one doorway is impacted, unilateral hearing loss, or whether that doorway is essentially closed, profound hearing loss. The problem is that doorway impedes auditory information from getting to the auditory brain to develop and integrate auditory pathways throughout the brain. Hearing loss is a doorway problem. So, as audiologists, we have to analyze what's happening in this doorway. That's what the audiogram does. It measures the quantity and quality of this doorway obstruction. And we have to understand this doorway problem in order to know the treatment. Now, the treatment for a doorway problem, if there's a medical obstruction, perhaps a medical procedure. If it's, for example, otosclerosis or middle ear infections, medical management might be the first line of defense. If it's a sensory issue, then the way to get through the doorway is with technology, with hearing aids, cochlear implants, bone-anchored devices, and of course remote microphone systems. And the choice of technology depends on what's happening in the doorway. And the doorway may change over time, so therefore technology will change. So what I typically do in conversations with families about hearing as a brain issue, And hearing loss is a doorway problem. And the only purpose of technology is to get information through the doorway to the brain. I, in those initial conversations, mention, maybe not the details of, but mention all of our technologies. I don't drop different technologies in over time, but overall, the overview, what's the big picture, is we have an amazing array of technologies that are designed to breach the doorway and deliver the best possible auditory information to the brain. And the technology chosen for a baby or child may change over time as the doorway changes. And in fact, studies have shown that 40+% of doorways do change over time. Hearing losses may progress. But we've got a solution for that progression. You know, we have various technologies that are designed to deal with different types and configurations of doorway problems. And we look uniquely as pediatric audiologists at the unique doorway issue, family constellation, child needs to recommend the best possible technology. Now, as wonderful as our current technologies are, they are not the same as the organic doorway. They're excellent, but they're not perfect. So we need to enrich information that we send through these doorway devices to the brain. So as audiologists, we need to link the technology to the use of the technology for the purpose of developing that child's brain and offering suggestions for families to enrich and feed their child's neural development by conversations that are developmentally appropriate, read-alouds, music, working as a team, audiologists, with other service delivery providers to support the family in developing that child's brain, so that the family, as they put on their child's technology, thinks, wow, I am now growing my child's brain. And you know what? We have studies that show that that technology does need to be worn at least 10 hours a day, 10 to 12 hours a day, because look at the analogy. Humans are born with eyelids that close off the visual doorway. We are not born with earlids. There are no earlids, which means that human brains are available through an intact doorway for auditory information 24/7. But because none of our current technologies are designed for 24-hour wear, we're not saying to families, keep this device on 24 hours. What we're saying is 10 to 12 hours in an enriched, intentional, thoughtful, developmentally appropriate, conversational, reading aloud, musical environment will develop this child's brain and set in place the foundations for listening, talking, reading, learning, and making friends.